Welcome to another episode of Inspired Content, where I rate, review, and offer up prompts for you to create new content inspired by books, games, movies, and more. This episode we'll be looking at the MCU Captain Marvel that just came out not that long ago, so let's get into it. This movie I would rate about a 5.1 out of 5.6. I feel like there's a lot of potential in this movie. My biggest hurdle for some of this is I think there's a lot of aspects that the existing Marvel Cinematic Universe kind of hobbled this Captain Marvel movie. And I mean, what I mean by that is essentially that with a universe that's 20 some odd movies in already, you've already established the different races in space, the conflict, the objects of power that people are after, all the parts have already been set. You don't have the ability, you don't have the freedom to do a character story that's going to be so enmeshed in the larger universe. Like with a Black Panther, their isolation from everybody else allowed them to be like, well, this is what's happening in our area that nobody else contacts or interacts with. This is all about our internal conflict and how we're struggling to get connected with everything outside of us. Where with this movie, like, you already have an existing cosmos full of conflicts and events going on. The Kree have already been established in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. as having wanted to do some serious harm to other planets. We've already established that connection with their blood changes human beings in some cases. We've already established that humanity has Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. Task force to handle certain things going on in the world. We've already established that something like a Skrull coming to Earth would be dealt with by S.H.I.E.L.D. We've already established that Earth doesn't have faster than light technology, so how are they going to get encounters with the Kree if that's not happening in this way in whatever format? Like, there's a whole world of events that have already been set up, and they tried to work a little bit around it by setting it in the 90s before any of the rest of the Avengers stuff has happened, even before Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. happened. So they sort of tried to get around it, but they're still going to have to keep in mind that a lot of the things that happen in this movie have to make sense with all the rules and setup that the rest of the movies have established. And so it's already hedged in. This is what you've got to work with. And so I feel like with that in mind, this movie is... It sort of felt like... It sort of felt like the middle episode in a series, which it sort of is. And at the same time, it feels like instead of being a movie in and of itself alone and not basically it feels like it's been made into a prelude to what comes next. It's the lead up. It's the preface of the big novel. And so it doesn't get a moment to be its own thing independent of the rest of the universe. And I think that sort of harms it, and it also sets it up as this movie being almost like an Act 1. If you view this as Act 1 of a movie, it's a better Act 1 than it is a whole movie. And I liked the movie to a certain degree. I enjoyed the movie. It felt more like a Phase 1. It felt like Thor, where they're setting you up for what comes afterwards. introducing the character to play on the greater stage of the existing universe. And it felt like a Phase 1, which is unfortunate because if it had been released with other Phase 1s, I think this is something that could have done alright in between Thor and Captain America. I think it would have done okay. It would have done at least as well probably as Iron Man 2. Done better than Incredible Hulk. I really feel that if this was a Phase 1 movie when they were doing Phase 1, nobody would have blinked an eye. But they did Phase 1 in the middle of whatever phase we're in now. And so it feels older. It feels less achieved. And I feel like part of that is down to it being a Phase 1 style movie in the wrong phase. And part of that is down to this didn't have the chance to be its own thing outside of being the follow-up to a bunch of movies while also being the prelude to a bunch of other movies. It sort of got the middle child syndrome of the whole situation. Now, you know, I don't have a lot of problem with most of what happened in this movie. I'm a little bothered by a cat scratch being what did Fury's eye in, but I mean, okay. As long as it's not something we bring up over and over again and make a joke out of it. I don't think it's, you know, it was probably the wrong way to do that, but the thing I have to, you know, remember or remind people, I feel like I have to remind people at least, is that everything I've ever seen of Captain Marvel suggests she's a very authoritarian individual. She believes that people like herself who are powerful, they believe they're using their power to the benefit of the people around them, and the people around them must accept their use of their powers to benefit them, whether or not they think it's for their benefit. It's sort of like being told, like, look, this is what's good for you, just accept it. And her character has come across like that at least a few times from what I've seen. I'm not a big reader of her comics, but I have seen that character portrayal a few times mentioned and stuff. So I'm not surprised that she comes off as sort of like a, well, I'm gonna beat the crap out of all sorts of things and you're going to accept that I'm doing this for your own good. And that doesn't surprise me as a character attitude. And I think one of the other things I would say is she's an elite commando. She is a soldier of a military force who's unparalleled in anything else they're facing. And the Kree, from what we've seen so far, are essentially doing to their population what we did to one person, Steve Rogers. So if you imagine an entire race of beings that Captain America'd themselves up into super beings, and she serves on their forces, she's an elite commando. Her situation is to operate within that realm of thought, how to conduct oneself as an elite commando. And so there is a sort of a stiff, kind of rigid character to that kind of personality. Even, you know, as much as it's played for jokes with Captain America, where he talks about watch your language kind of stuff, like that's like a naive kind of innocent sort of behavior for the character, and it's sort of played for a little bit of laughs. But in the race of Kree, they don't take any of that lightly, and they don't accept naivete. They are soldiers fore and foremost. And then on top of her being a commando like that, essentially she's then dropped on Earth We can't lift cars, we can't shoot energy blasts, we can't punch through concrete easily, and we can't even fly out of our own atmosphere on a daily basis. We are technologically, physiologically, and intellectually inferior to the Kree as far as they're concerned. Now, she's been essentially raised as a Kree. All her memories are living among the Kree, super soldiers of the galaxy. And we are stupid monkeys as far as she's concerned. But she doesn't treat us like that, and that's sort of one of the things I want to get at is, like, given the fact that she is a super soldier with a superior technological advantage and a society that has unified to a degree where there is literally not much conflict on their own world amongst their own people, and then you slap her down in the middle of Earth, she has every right to sneer down her nose at us. But she's dead set to make sure that we are protected from a threat outside of our world. She sees the Skrull as a threat, so she's going to protect us from it. Now, does it have that authoritarian for your own good? To a degree, yes it does. And I don't think that at any point in this movie do we get the sense that she rediscovers her own humanity yet. She understands this is where she comes from, but I don't think she's learned to become human yet again. And so I feel like that's why it feels sort of like an Act 1. You have the character who discovers that what she thought was the case wasn't the case, but she's still Kree, and she's still a super soldier, and she's still a commando, and we're still technologically, physiologically, and intellectually inferior to everything she knows now. And so, coming around to the features that make humans decent and worthy of connecting with again and identifying yourself as, that's going to be a hard journey. And I feel like that's where Act 2 and 3 would come in. And this feels like just the Act 1. Now, having said all of that, there is one thing that I didn't like very much, and quite honestly, it's just down to my personal taste, and that was the Skrull. The look, the design of the Skrull is good. The characterization of the Skrull bothered me. They're played off as a lighthearted, almost goof in a lot of the ways they do things, and I don't much care for it. Some of the value of the Skrull is that there is something sinister about being able to impersonate anybody, and I don't feel they ever achieved any kind of sinister aspect. It wasn't used well enough. And then to have them be like vulnerable, sad, and lost alien race being victimized by the superior Kree. Like, you can have them be at conflict with the Kree and still not be harmed innocents. Like, you can have a war between two races and have neither of them be innocent victims. And I feel like they didn't take that opportunity. They played the Skrull as too innocent and too victimized, without a sense of what makes Skrull something that through comic history has made them a threat and some good villains, as well as a few characters who became heroes. And like, they're examples of like villainous Skrull activity, but there are also characters like Elijah Storm, I believe, is one of them, and there was a storyline where Skrull mutants came to Earth under the guidance of Charles Xavier, and they were trying to hide out from being victimized. But by no margin did we have them portrayed as children, almost. And that's what the Skrull felt like this. Like, even the adult Skrulls felt like... They felt like the Thermians from Galaxy Quest. That's what's bugging me. They're very comedic, and it just didn't feel right for me. And part of that is just because I'm a huge fan of shapeshifters in movies, and the nuance of somebody who can become somebody else. And I don't feel they did decently with that. I mean, the early scene where they impersonate Coulson, Agent Coulson. I wanted to say Carson, that's not right. Agent Coulson from S.H.I.E.L.D. Like, that was well done, but even then, there was no, like, sinister nature to it. It was just like, well, I'm stepping in here to get me to where I need to be to do what I need to do. But it wasn't like he didn't feel like a deadly threat. I don't know. It's just sort of like, I don't know. It bugged me a little bit. And, like, the cat was played up for laughs. I liked the fact that the cat was observing them, and there was a sense of, like, that's not normal behavior for a cat. Like, there's something there, and I don't know what it is. Is it a Skrull? What's going on there? Is there another player on the field that we don't know about? Like, what's going on? So I was just sort of like, I wish there had been a little bit more handling that a little differently too. But at any rate, what did you think of some of the points I've just made? I know there's a lot of controversy around the actor and the agenda of Disney, but that's not what I'm looking at. I'm looking at this as the movie, and what parts of it I think were good and could be expanded in ways, and ideas of world building and character development that I'd like to explore more. And I kind of want to know what you guys thought about some of those aspects that I just brought up. And now, here are the 6 prompts I came up with based off of aspects of this movie. So number 1. I kind of, like, I know a little bit of the story from the comics and some of the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. stuff. And I'm not as super familiar with the Kree Supreme Intelligence as I probably could be. The Marvel Universe stuff, like the Galaxy stuff, wasn't usually something I followed a lot on. But I liked the idea of the Supreme Intelligence, or if you were to write another story and you don't want to set it as fan fiction in the Marvel, alien AI or Supreme Intelligence of some kind, basically building a race of beings that are basically stitched together from aspects of different races, chimeras essentially. What you've got is, like, in this case you have Captain Marvel is augmented through introduction of Kree blood, and the Kree are built up as like super soldiers. So I kind of like the idea of an alien intelligence that is sort of putting together the best features they can find from different races in the galaxy, and like bringing in a new person and giving them features from other races. Not so much like making them all homogeneously a similar race that's a combination of features of all races, but more sort of like, well, here, let's give you this feature and you'll team up with these other people who are built slightly differently, but you can work together well because you're all chimeras. So building a science fiction story like that, I think, would be kind of fun. Number 2, what if the main character was a shapeshifter? So basically in this case, it would be the Kree are sort of like lords over this Skrull-like aliens, and they train a Skrull to infiltrate Earth. And the main character is one of those Skrulls. Now, in this case, we would change the, it wouldn't be Kree, it wouldn't be Skrulls, and it wouldn't be Earth. Well, it might be Earth. But basically having a character who's a shape-shifting inferior race, sort of trained like a hound or a servant of the superior race, to infiltrate and control the course of events on Earth, but ends up getting here and decides to become a hero for Earth. Idea number 3 is, what if the Marv-El character was, again, an alien being, comes to Earth and is sort of like a refugee or a rebel, comes to Earth because we have some feature that they don't have, and starts to adapt technology that could benefit the victims of their own race, and in doing so realizes that they've made a target of themselves. So they need to train and augment a human or some humans to be protectors and to forward the course they set, even if they don't survive. So it would be something like you build a 2 or 3 augmented humans with technology and whatnot, and they essentially become superhero-style human beings, Avenger-style characters, with the point of carrying on Marv-El's work, even if Marv-El doesn't survive when they come to eliminate her. And I think there's a way to tell a story like that without it seeming like this movie. Alright, so it's sort of like uplifting again. Like the last episode I talked about uplifting, where some books have had us uplifting animals from animal state to a near human state. In this case, it would be a superior race uplifting humanity into essentially super soldiers or cyborgs or whatever, and then they take a role in protecting humanity, but also spreading the protective and rebellion agenda that the Marv-El character would have been trying to do, that made them an outcast. So, alright, so number 4. Okay, so this one's a little weird, but I think it has room for being a good narrative, I don't want to say style, but you have, instead of Kree being the big, powerful military super soldier organization, what if it's us? 150 years into the future, we've augmented ourselves and made us all ourselves such powerful beings, and we continue the pattern we currently seem to display of going out and finding countries that need to be democratized. We need to bring them towards our way of life, we have a tendency to do. at least in the Western world. I'm sure it happens everywhere, but you know, we see other beings as struggling to survive in a fitful and primitive way, and we need to civilize them. And if you built the story where we are the Kree in this story like that, and then we go to one of these primitive, uncivilized worlds and find a member of one of their races, and we make them into a Captain Marvel-like character and absorb them into our culture and training, and then bring them back to the world to spread the missionary status of our way of life, and instead they turn on us and highlight and expose the arrogance in that mode of operation and take us down for our own behaviors. That would be an interesting and a hard line to pull off a good story without making overly Nazi-like references to how the humans are behaving, or overly betrayal like the behavior of the Captain Marvel style character would be. And I guess I'm doing a lot of air quotes in this one because it's hard to separate this from the Marvel Universe without, like, it comes across a lot as like fan fiction. Okay, so number 5. So I had this weird idea, like, if you have this AI supreme intelligence among the Kree, I don't understand why they would just leave blank spaces in her mind. Like, why wouldn't they write in a whole history? I mean, I'm thinking like Blade Runner, where they deposited in an entire memory of a childhood into a replicant who didn't have that childhood. Why wouldn't an AI just build that kind of thing for that character? And like, if you could do that, wouldn't you just like have a storage bank of like off-the-shelf personalities? And so in my mind, I have this idea of like this alien civilization that is got a storage bank of a set number, like a finite number, a set number of personalities that it uses to build up cities and worlds of certain population. And when they conquer another population, they take all the people of that population, wipe all their memories and personalities, and just implant one of their off-the-shelf personalities. And you've instantly assimilated an entire population. But what if something about like one of our explorers, a test vehicle, gets them trapped on a world that's distant from us, and they get absorbed, assimilated into this society, and they have the same personality as, like, when she's in her unit of like 6 or 7 people, what if there are 3 of her personality in that unit? What if you only have like 5 different types of personalities? Sort of like a D&D class. Like, you have your fighters, you have your thieves, you have your healers, and so you have your different classes of characters, and you have a template for each of them with some basic memories programmed in to fit on that template. And so you've got these character templates that you use, and in her unit, or in her group of people that she knows and has a life with, 2 or 3 of them have the same personality as her. They have many of the same memories. They essentially feel like clones or duplicates of one another. And you just kind of understand that to be the case. But then suddenly the alien species that absorbed her like that finds the planet that she's from and is on the way to conquer that planet. Something about us as humans makes that not click as well. That alternate personality doesn't hold over us the same way. And so what if, she's sent to be sort of like the beachhead onto this new world because she's one of us, but she's one of them. And that sort of starts to fall apart when she's exposed to our own culture and society, which degrades the programmed personality that they put into her. Because that programmed personality doesn't take into account some of the ways we think and behave. And it won't catch them when she's exposed to an environment that engages her human behaviors. This is a long one. But, so that was one of the ideas there. And then 6. Okay, this is hard. This is going to be another long one, I think. This is going to be a hard one to explain. But what if the main character grew up and lived what feels like an ordinary life here on Earth, but ends up captured and trained and augmented by an alien species to be like a super soldier or a commando in their bid to conquer the universe. And in exploring and trying to understand the connection they feel to Earth, they start to uncover the truth that they in fact are a Skrull who was left behind by a shape-shifting species that were being eliminated, or were being hunted by the Kree, because the Kree are trying to absorb the abilities of all the other races, and the Skrull are resisting and fleeing and not willing to be absorbed. It's the one skill that the Kree don't have that they would like to have, but the Skrull would rather die or hide than ever allow their gifts to be used by the Kree. And what you have is a child who was a Kree hidden among humans who thinks they're human, and then when they're absorbed into the Kree, they become what the Kree have always wanted. A Kree warrior with the skills of a Kree warrior and the augmentation of a Kree warrior, but with the shape-shifting and benefits of a Skrull warrior. And the thing that's going to deny the Kree ownership of that is the fact that they were raised as a human. And so they become a champion of humanity and Earth, and to a degree the hiding and fleeing Skrulls, and an opponent of Kree conquest. Now you're going to change the names of all the races, and you're going to kind of change some of the aspects and the appearances and whatnot of them all. But I think that could be a decent science fiction story. Now, if I were to try to pick a favorite of this batch, I'm kind of curious about I like the Chimera one, honestly. It's a toss-up, really, for me between the number 1 and number 5. The Chimera, like the alien race that makes chimeras, and the AI that uploads, say, 5 to 8 different minds into all the conquered people, and how it doesn't take hold because of introducing that one character to human society, touches on aspects that the Kree didn't know how to block off because it's not something they're used to. I like both of those ideas. There may be a way to combine them to make a unique story, but what was your favorite idea out of this batch? If you like any of these and you create any ideas from some of these prompts, I'd love to hear about it. You can send me some information or links to what you create in the social media links that I post down below. Next episode will be Oregon Trail, the board game, not the computer game. I guess it's a tabletop game, it's not a board as yet. And the next movie that I will be doing will be Avengers Endgame, and it'll be very spoilerific. And that'll be the second video in May. So you'll have a little bit of time to see it before I do it. But if you haven't seen it by the time it goes up, spoiler warning ahead of time. If you're looking for more prompts from movies like this one or other movies out there, you can check out the playlist that I link up on the side here. If you're interested in seeing anything that I'm working on, you can check out the playlist of daily live videos that I post every night. I'll post a link to that playlist over here. And if you would like to see any more of my other prompts on books, movies, tabletop games, product or services, foods, art, music, and video games, just head on over to my channel and subscribe if you want to receive any updates about new content. And thanks for joining me for this episode, and I hope to see you on a future episode. Take care.